Welcome to another episode of the Reboot Chronicles, a no-holds-barred forum with global leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, and CEOs about how organizations stay focused on growth and innovation in unprecedented times. I'm your host, Dean DeBiase, coming to you live from Reviv's North American headquarters in Chicago, and we would like to thank you for joining us from around the globe today. I'd like to welcome Pauline Brown to the program today. She's an author, luxury guru, SiriusXM host, and former North American chairman of LVMH, what I like to call the world's leading luxury products group. They've got about 75 brands, 60 billion in revenue approximately. That was last year. And a retail network spanning over 5,000 stores, selling everything from fashion to cosmetics to champagne, something I like to talk about today. Welcome, Pauline. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, looking good there in New York. We usually start out with some data on this show, if there is any floating around. So I've got some on the luxury market. I thought we'd kind of throw it out there. Maybe we can chat about it. But this is from Bain. This is from the Luxury Report, and also some data from Reviv, our sponsor. The short term, it looks like the personal luxury goods is going to fall about 60% global revenues in Q2. I don't think that's a big surprise. Some people thought it might be 40, but it's pretty big. Previous reports before the pandemic was the market might reach 1.5 trillion by 2025. Not sure you're on board with that. We'll find out. And with China still making up about half of that, millennials, they say, representing about half of that. I don't think that's accurate, but again, older data. But experiential luxury is growing faster than all the other categories. This is what I do believe. For those of you that don't know what that is, obviously it's dining, hotels, cruises, resorts, wine, spirits, furniture, lighting. I don't know how lighting gets in there. Cars, boats, and technology. Technology, that's me. Sign me up. So, and again, they think China's probably going to be 40% of that market. That was pre-travel issues. So I thought maybe that'd be a good place to start. What do you think of the luxury market? Is it as bad as some people are saying?
Well, first of all, there's no natural definition of a luxury market. It's not like what is luxury? I mean, if I even look within the LVMH portfolio, you have brands that are like a Sephora. If you look at who shops at a Sephora, it's the same woman who shops at Target. She probably spends more at Sephora on cosmetics than she would spend on personal care or cosmetics at Target, but she's the same woman. Then you look at another brand within the portfolio like Loro Piana, which sells multi-$1,000 cashmere vests. That does not have a Target shopper. So I think this luxury is sort of a catch-all for a group of products that are relatively high priced for their category, that are typically sold in very, carefully marketed and aspirational settings. But beyond that, there's no commonality across the spectrum. And even when I think of the data that you showed, the 1-point-something trillion, I say, what does that include? I mean, is a Mercedes in the same category as a perfume?
That has to have cars in it. It's just too big of a number. Exactly.
It's a big
Now,
number.
all this, I mean, you used to, we'll get into LVMH in a bit, but you used to do this. You're loading up the stores, flooding it for spring and summer, chock full of stuff. Global shutdown, all the doors are closed. They're sitting on tons of inventory. So, you're part of the industry, used to do all kinds of things. It's like, thou shalt not discount. We'd rather destroy our products. So are they still doing stuff like that?
Well, some brands can get away with it. Many brands can't. I mean, when you said, for example, that in Q2, 60% of sales are going away, there are segments of luxury like fashion where it's closer to 100%. In fact, I just saw a report come out on Canada Goose. They have virtually no sales. Who's buying a high-end parka as we go into the summer season and stores are closed and people don't have discretionary income? And none of these goods, the other commonality across all these different segments of luxury is that they're totally discretionary. Food is not. So I think these segments will be far, far more harder hit than the 60% you cited.
Yeah, it was an easy figure, not something harsh. Canadian Goose is there's a lesson there about product diversity, diversifying the line and all that stuff. Maybe we'll have their CEO on and see what's going on there. Let's jump into something a little more fun, though. Tell us about your experiences at SiriusXM. I know you started out on the business channel, but now you're doing something much more fun. What's some of the things you do on the show?
Well, I've always been fascinated with creative people, and if there was a way to make money in it, I'd probably be in the arts. But I found that the closest intersection between an opportunity to actually pay my bills and to be with creatives is in this sort of luxury consumer branded area. So in the very beginning, I just invited leaders who either were founders of exciting creative brands, people who worked in companies like LVMH or Estee Lauder, where I worked earlier in my career, and just tried to understand how the process of commercializing great aesthetic concepts. What I found after a couple of years of doing that is, as much as I enjoyed talking with these individuals, I really wasn't that interested in talking about business. I was really more interested in talking about the creative process. And so flash forward a few years, they moved me to the Stars Entertainment channel. I still have a lot of creative business minds on the show, but I like to talk about how ideas are brought to life. I like to talk about where those ideas come from. I'm fascinated with trend, and I don't mean fashion trend. I mean even trend in areas like technology, trends in social movements. So, I find anyone who has something to say, and hopefully you'll be a guest down the road as well, because you have a lot to say, has a place on my show, and it's called Tastemakers.
Ah, Tastemakers. Oh, I love that. That's actually a nice title. And you guys program on Saturdays. Are you live on Saturdays?
So we pre-record during the week, and then it airs several times on the weekend, Saturdays and Sundays.
Oh,
So
nice.
on the leisure hours.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to put that link in the podcast there so people can check it out. So let's talk about your career, because it's fascinating. You spent a lot of time at LVMH, ending up as the North American chairwoman. Do they call you chairwoman there? Was that, or your bio actually says chairman in the bio?
Yeah, you know what? I just went with the pithy option. I don't think there is a right or wrong on that one.
Oh, good. I'm not in trouble there. Good. So tell us about that role. What did you do? I mean, massive amount of brands, global reach, so much going on.
Well, the challenge that LVMH had, because it's a French-owned company, has, as you mentioned, over 70 brands that are mostly born and run out of various European markets. And yet the US, by the time I joined, was the single largest individual market. And yet the brand heads were all sitting in France and Italy, in a few cases Switzerland, in the case of the watch companies.
Right.
And they really didn't have good visibility into what, for many of them, was their largest market. So I was sort of sitting in this matrix structure between where the brands were being led globally and where the business was really happening on the ground. I found most of the executives would come to New York. Maybe they fly to Beverly Hills, and they forgot that America is a much more complex place than it often is understood outside looking in. So my job was two or threefold. It was being, eyes and ears for the global heads, again, mostly in Europe. It was being a leader in the US, where there was sort of a vacuum of leadership. You have 25,000 people, or you did when I was there, working out of the US, but they all felt they worked for one brand. They didn't feel the enormity of working for this very big group. So that was the other facet of the job, was giving them a center that was closer to home.
Yeah, and you were downtown New York. So what was the environment like there? It was kind of like Devil Wears Prada kind of stereotype, or what? I kind of just I'm visualizing your office, people running around screaming, stuff like that.
I mean, I'm sure if I was working on the store level or in the PR circles, I would have felt that. But the reality is, where I was sitting, attending board meetings and executive committee meetings, it was more barbarians at the gate. It was very, very competitive. I'd say that the toughest aspect of working there, and most of my colleagues, my American colleagues, would agree, is working for a French company. I had been, prior to that, with several multinational companies. I'd been with Bain, I'd been with the Carlyle Group, I'd been with Estee Lauder, Avon, but every one of them, pre-LVMH, were headquartered in the US. So it was very easy. And here I was, working for a French company, and I felt like I was the head of a colony. And Americans, as we know from history, don't deal very well with being colonized.
No, we don't like that. Oh gosh, I was a CEO of TNS Media, so it kind of reported into a French headquarters. I totally understand that. We ended up selling that to WPP, Martin Sorrell, and in the UK. So we went from one colony to the other empire. It's fascinating, good stories. But you mentioned barbarians at the gate. Let's talk about Tiffany. It's been on and off, I think, since November. I'm trying to buy it. Tiffany hard to get, changing the offers. Now, I think in yesterday's press, they said something like, we're not going to buy shares in the public market. I love the French press releases. They're like 2 lines. That's all it was. And but it was pretty clear to me. Do you think it's a good idea? Should they keep picking up these
Well, first of all,
iconic brands. I mean, Tiffany to me is like, that's a good one.
so I don't think there's any second guessing of the strategic rationale. I think there's serious second guessing, as there should be, of the price.
Right.
So they made an offer. They had actually upped the initial offer to $16 billion, which is basically an all-time high for that brand. Tiffany's been hit on both fronts. The fact that the coronavirus has not only closed retail around the world and disproportionately affected luxury goods, but now with the riots, even as they were gearing up to open, they really won't for some time. And Tiffany, unlike other LVMH properties, is a US-centric company. So I think that they just cannot justify at this point a premium that was offered in a very different environment. So there are three options that LVMH has, and I can tell you that they will have ruled out one of those three. So option one was just proceed as planned. We signed a deal. There was no out other than in the courts. Option two is renegotiate, something we can live with and continue to take a long-term approach. And option three is back out altogether because, frankly, our priorities have changed in the 6 months since we announced the deal. And I think it'll certainly be number two or three, but number two is going to be a hard one for the Tiffany shareholders because I don't think we're talking about shaving a few $100 million off. No. I think we're probably talking about shaving
a couple billion.
Couple billion.
Yeah,
big number.
It's tough. It's retail valuations are not like that. It's almost like a tech valuation, and it's so what we've seen in the Revive Beauty Index data is a lot of the things that you used to manage, cosmetics and skincare have been going through the roof. Easy things you can buy online. I don't see that happening with high-end jewelry. So that was almost a third hit they had. It's hard to buy something if the store's boarded up, but people aren't even in the mood to spend on that type of luxury.
I think
and travel luxury was totally shut down too. I think that'll come back probably quicker.
My information might be a bit dated here, but historically, the New York City flagship on 57th and 5th Avenue, the Tiffany flagship.
Love that store. Yeah.
A beautiful store. Obviously, there's a lot of heritage there, but that was about 25% of their global sales for all the different stores that they have around the world.
Right.
And that store is a tourist location. I would say probably 60% of the shoppers there are non-American. So we're not going to see them come back anytime soon, even if the protests go away and the rioting is less of a threat. The whole nature and desirability for luxury products, I think, has waned and will take a long time to get back on track.
Yeah, that's why I brought up the China data. Everyone always wonders why I bring up China. So, well, because they're buying a lot of this stuff, and it's the traveler that's buying a lot of this stuff as well. And the last I checked, I don't think we've lifted the travel ban from China for this country. And
so, yeah, I heard today that they're in negotiations. Basically, Trump just came out recently saying he was going to ban all Chinese flights from coming in because they had banned Delta and United from going to China.
Right.
So, it's a bit of a tete-a-tete. But I think the bigger issue, whether there are flights or no flights, is just the appetite to travel. It's going to take a long time for people to feel comfortable. People don't even feel comfortable going to a restaurant that's open. Restaurants that have opened in locations in the U.S. where the quarantine has been lifted, they're still down to 80%.
Exactly. And the only saving grace there is it's summertime. My girlfriend and I went downtown Denver last night, and it was fantastic sitting outside. But he said, would you like to come inside? She's like, no, sit right out here is fine. And
were you wearing a mask?
No, just to get there, yes. Yeah, to kind of get seated. But once you're seated, it was,
yeah,
a lot of space. Well, you can't get that in a lot of cities. It's too tight. And in one of the towns here in Littleton, Colorado, they're on Saturday nights. The proposal is to just shut down the street. So the restaurateurs, they don't want them to go to business. But I feel the same way about retailers. Can then put all the tables out on the street and just take up more room. So they're desperately trying to get people back to a normal. But travel's tough. We're probably going to have United and Delta, American, Marriott on sometime this year. Just giving them time right now. They don't have time to really talk. But yeah, when you have people like us who travel 2-3 times a week, not still in fear, I'll just say it. There's some fear there of the uncertainty. It's tough. Even people I know in the travel industry. We're going to have the head of one of the major casino brands on soon. He just took his first trip and took pictures of it and posted it. I'm like, you never post pictures of yourself on a plane.
Right.
So yeah, it's tough. Well, thanks for your comments on Tiffany. It'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. My opinion on any type of acquisitions in a downturn is a great time to, be more of a conglomerate. Capitalist pig side of me says that. So you see a lot of the tech companies doing that. Google, Amazon, and many others are looking to roll things up. Speaking of tech, we spent a lot of time talking about AI on the show, artificial intelligence, and you wrote a book about AI, but it's the other AI. It's aesthetic intelligence. A new book that came out this year. We'll put the link in the podcast. Fantastic book. A lot of questions about it, but maybe just the open-ended one to get you started. Why'd you write it? What's it about? How can it help? We tend to have a lot of indie brands on the show, giving them a chance to, and it's really tough for them out there now, obviously, from a funding perspective and just getting people to spend the money. So, yeah, I'd love to hear about the book and maybe how, what indie brands could maybe learn from some of the aesthetic intelligence tips.
Sure. Well, so my alter title for the book, which not too many people know, is What They Never Taught Me at the Wharton Business School. So I graduated from Wharton as a marketing major in '95, and I did what a lot of people do when they come out of school and have no idea what they're going to do with the rest of their life. I went into management consulting. I was a strategy consultant at Bain. And my first real job, which was post-Bain, was at Estee Lauder. I went there having never worked in the cosmetic industry. I only knew how to apply it to my own face. And I remember very early on, I took that Bain toolkit and I was going to, as their head of strategy, impress them with a very voluminous deck.
And conquer them, yes.
Conquer them and bring them into the, near 21st century. We weren't quite there yet. And my boss, who was the COO at the time, eventually the CEO, sort of slammed down the deck and he said, Pauline, I need you to think like an owner and act like an owner here, not like an observer, which is basically what Bain trains you to do very well. And I realized that, unless I had sort of real empathy for why a woman would come to a counter, spend maybe 5 or 6 times for one product that she could spend on this very similar product in a drugstore, unless I really understood and was able to get to that moment of truth more authentically, that I really wasn't well suited for this industry. And, over the course of the next 20 years, even when I went to the Carlyle Group, I was investing in premium brands. And I felt there was this other sensibility that they never taught me at Wharton, that other sensibility that might have been introduced earlier in my career really took sort of some hard knocks on the job. And it was that there's this concept which very loosely we think of as brand management or brand marketing, but even brand marketing as a sort of clinical and very analytic thought process. And it's not to say I eschew that kind of thinking. I just think it has to be complemented by an understanding of craft and of art and of an emotional appeal that certain products have, certain services can offer, environments can create, that kind of speaks to our humanity. And before I wrote the book, and I was leaving the world of big business, I was teaching or I was pitching the opportunity to teach at the Harvard Business School. I said, there's this new way of interacting and thinking about the customer that really hasn't entered our vernacular. And the then dean of the school said, well, that's interesting. What would you call this class? And I really hadn't even thought about a name. And I just, well, it's kind of like the business of aesthetics. And she said, oh, I love it. How do you spell it? And that was the beginning of a course that then 2 years later turned into a book project. The reason that the book is not entitled Business of Aesthetics is because what I realized after teaching for some time, that there was something missing from my coursework that was not just looking at businesses in terms of how they might be transformed through aesthetic value, through infusing and creating great aesthetic value, but it's how do you as an individual, whether you're the CEO or the CFO or the CMO or a founder, in the case of many of your listeners, how do you actually bring that into the company? Where does it start? And I concluded it really starts with one's own aesthetic intelligence. And then from there, it goes into your strategy and into everything you do, basically.
Yeah, we had the founder and CEO of Credo on last week, and they've done an amazing job. At a smaller level, they don't have thousands of stores, but they've kept that throughout. And then they've set up a really nice platform. I think they're gonna do well as a kind of a hybrid brand that brings in all the independent brands that are truly clean and pass all the tests, and not on the dirty list as they call it. So the and then what? So you taught that at Harvard. That kind of accumulated into a book. Kind of sounds like my process. It just between writing and teaching,
Okay.
and just you have all this content. But you're also doing Columbia. So Columbia, Harvard,
Mhm.
different styles of teaching, different styles of teaching for you there.
Yeah. Well, one of the caliber of students at both places, first rate, as is the case with Kellogg, with Wharton.
Yeah.
Um, but I felt, I mean, to be completely candid, the reason I migrated to Columbia is because I live in New York and the commute's a
Yeah.
lot
So I
easier.
like the commute. It's nice.
But the other point I'll make is Harvard is very religious. You probably know this about their case study method. And there
Yes.
really have been no cases ever written around this concept that, I'm still trying to socialize. So I kind of had to make them up as I went. And so Columbia offers a bit more flexibility in how I teach what I teach. But both schools are wonderful and provide a platform for me to experiment and to test how even my own students at that stage in their life can cultivate their own aesthetic intelligence, which, by the way, is a fancy word or term for taste.
Exactly. Yeah. I think you said somewhere in your book or somewhere I read that companies have kind of lost their reason for being, their raison d'être. And what do you mean by that?
Well, I'm sure I've said that in many different contexts. If I
I like it
just
when you say it in French better, actually.
the raison d'être.
See?
So, I think it's most obvious when it comes to retail. We are just retail has become a scale game. I think everyone in a race to try to, if not catch up to Amazon, at least try to sort of stave off the competitive threats, have taken an approach that they will never win. I always say there's
Defeated. Yeah.
nobody can do Amazon better than Amazon, and nobody can do Walmart better than Walmart. But if you're a retailer, whether you have 5 stores or you have 100 or you have 1,000, you have to double down on the things that they can never do. Amazon, for example, can never appeal to people's aspirational dreams. They're not in the business. They're there to solve a problem and to do it as cheaply, as quickly, as seamlessly as possible. And they do that very, very well. But why
Exactly.
do people buy? I mean, most people, if they're going to buy one product over another, choose one brand over another, there's a huge emotional component to that. And very few companies, although I would say, tap into that fully.
Yeah. Yeah, we had Steve Dennis on Remarkable Retails, his book, and they're just unremarkable. I mean, I did a book project with Seth Godin, so he kind of hijacked the, remarkable retail, and it's very tough. And one of the issues they cite is they trying to be like Amazon and Walmart was your first mistake. What else have you made mistakes on? The And it's interesting during the pandemic and the shutdown and the quote unquote, you're essential, I'm not essential. Apparently Tiffany's wasn't essential. I think it should have been. What's wrong with love, right? It's like, come on, all the liquor stores and marijuana stores are open out here.
And
Anyway,
by the way,
I
prestige
digress.
liquor, luxury liquor is doing just fine.
Exactly. That's a good point. Anyway, my point there was, the whole concept of Walmart and Amazon, they have become more utilitarian during this crisis. Is they're
Yes.
almost like they're like the post office now, and so I think there's an opportunity to differentiate and stand out and be more remarkable because of that. If you can survive, is the comma question? That's the issue now.
And many won't survive. They can't undo the past. They have too large a footprint. They, have been selling stuff, and this is the first time in human history where even the poorest segments of our society, of our at least in mature market society, are not wanting. They're not starving on the streets. They may not be well nourished, but they're not starving. Even the poorest segments are not needing another T-shirt. They may not have high fashion, but they're clothed. So one of the points I'd like to make is aesthetics is not, and should never be seen as confined to the luxury segment. I see aesthetics in the mass market all the time. I don't see it a lot, and therefore, not surprisingly, a lot of these mass market products, as well as even luxury companies that don't do it well, are going to fall by the wayside. But at every price point, you can make your product or your service or your experience more aesthetic than it was. And by the way, it's not always about budget. Sometimes I think increasing your
Ah,
works against a company. And I always say, if you just let's just take a hospital or an elementary school. Stay away from business for a minute.
Okay.
Even though neither of those institutions are going to have a budget to hire the likes of a Peter Marino, one of the most expensive architects and designers in the world, who does all the Chanel stores. Nobody's going to hire him. But there's somebody in your operation who is going to decide what color paint goes on the wall, or what pattern of tile goes on the floor. And at every price point for tile, you have thousands of permutations that can still meet your functional needs. I'm not saying all of a sudden you should put a tile that's going to get scratched or not wear properly. And I think if you understand, if you're in that hospital or in that school facility, that these decisions actually have an emotional impact on how children learn, on how patients heal, then maybe you should just be more mindful. So, so some of the most exciting ideas I see around me in stores, in restaurants, they didn't come with a bigger budget than their large-scale competitors. They just came with a better eye, more compassion, attention to detail that's required, a caring. It's a lot about caring and authenticity.
Yeah. I'm sensing a book series here. Functional aesthetics would be next, or cost-effective ones for the retailers. How big was your beauty cosmetics skincare business at LVMH back in the day?
So if you take Sephora out, which is now the #1 retailer in the US of cosmetics, and you just talk about the cosmetic brands, it was about approaching a third of our business.
Wow.
So we had across many different brands. You have Dior Parfum, you have Benefit Cosmetics, Fresh, which is a skincare brand, Makeup Forever. I mean, there were many, many different brands, some of which are sold in Sephora, many of which are not. And then earlier in my career, I spent about a decade in the cosmetic industry, where 100% of what my employer was selling was in the broadly defined world of beauty.
Yeah, so we had Chief Innovation Officer on from Estee the other day, and it was we had a nice chat, a lot about love and compassion and creativity, and how to inject it into brands and keep them on their edge and competitive. One of the trends we're seeing at Revive is obviously more personalization, more bring your own device, taking a picture of yourself, not using and touching the store devices. And so that whole, use your own device trend, we're seeing that across all brands, all types of stores. How do you think the retail experience is going to change over the next couple of years, given what we're coming out of? Well, or quite frankly, what we're still in? Most people think we're coming out of it. We're going to be in it for a while.
We're going to be in it for a while. There's always going to be a limitation to technology when it comes to such an aesthetic concept as cosmetics and beauty. If you think about the word aesthetics, aesthetics is not the same, by the way, as beauty. It's not a synonym for beauty, and it's not for design either, which is visual and tends to be more about harmony. Aesthetics is about the senses. It actually comes from the Greek word aesthetikos, which is unrelated to an anesthesiologist, for example, whose job is to numb your senses. So a great aesthetic experience typically arouses more than just visual. It can be the scent, which you get no sense of when you're doing something through technology. Right. It can be the feel. They call it the slip if it's a lipstick or even a face cream. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that technology is a nice enhancement, and the ones that are doing it well really are integrating the technology with the offline in ways that complement. But I don't see a day where we would see 80% of sales and of trend being set through any one of these, digital forums.
Yeah, it's meant to be. I just wrote an article about this. To me, it's AI, and it's the invisible enabler. The technology needs to fade in the background. It just needs to help. So in some cases, it's an assisted technology in the store where you have the beauty consultant or whatever. In other cases, it's self-serve. And in other cases, like, I want to touch it. Well, it's okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the whole visual aesthetics thing is huge too. Like, your background is great. I'm visualizing the hand now when we get off the network. I want to see, next time we're on, I want to see the champagne bottle in the hand. Like that.
Well, what you do see in the hand actually back here is a necklace.
I see the ring, the necklace.
And I treat it as a ring. And if you're going to take away anything about my personality from my aesthetic choices, it's that I like to bring in some whimsy and some unexpected and some humor.
I
And
love it.
oversized, I guess it just reminds me how small I am. I'm actually not so small, but next to that hand, I'm feeling very small. I also have a taxidermy peacock if I were to change the direction of this camera.
Of course you do. Perhaps we'll put a picture of that on the podcast. That'd be cool. Send it to me. You've been listening to Pauline Brown. She is just an amazing luxury guru, and catch her on XM radio. And any parting thoughts for aspiring entrepreneurs who are actually starting companies in the luxury brand world?
Well, you mentioned, and I would agree, that the challenges in the near term will hit entrepreneurs particularly hard, whether it's because of lack of funding or lack of scale. But I'd say in the mid to long term, this is going to be a sort of an entrepreneurial wave 3.0. I think big companies are so stuck and so entrenched in ways of operating that will no longer be relevant going forward, and the agility and the creativity that's going to come out of smaller, younger companies is something that gives me a lot of confidence. And so if you can withstand the pressures of the next many months, maybe few years, the other side of this is going to look very, very exciting.
Yeah, stay strong. Go for the long run. Don't worry about the quick hits. Thanks, Pauline. Really enjoyed having you on. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, and I got to get you on my SiriusXM show. It'll be fun.
We'll do it. I like Saturdays. Take care.